So as part of the celebration for Marvel Future Fight's 6th anniversary, we as the player base are intended to get a Tier 3 Selector. And for many players, this poses a unique opportunity to get a character from a limited roster to Tier 3 immediately without spending any resources on them. So, this begs the question, who are the best characters to use this Tier 3 Selector on? And that's what I'm going to be trying to address with this video. I'm going to be making a tier list that will arrange all the characters that are available in the Tier 3 Selector from D tier to S tier, and will hopefully serve as a guide that you can reference when making your choice once you get the Tier 3 Selector. Now, an important thing to note is that all the characters that are available for selection in the Tier 3 Selector are of the 800 CCF variety, but not all are available. So characters like Loki, Daredevil, and Rogue will not be part of this list because they're not options for the Tier 3 Selector. I'm only going to be going over the ones that have been listed in Marvel Future Fight's official forum post as part of the Tier 3 Selector. And though this probably should be obvious already, this list is mostly based on my opinion. Yes, I do try to take into consideration things that my friends and other players say, because I don't have all of these characters at Tier 3 necessarily. But yeah, this will mostly be based on my opinion. If you have a differing opinion, you know what, it's fine. It's okay if you don't agree with what I say. You can follow whatever you believe in and all that. But this is just kind of me trying to be helpful to people who may not have any idea about how these Tier 3s compare in terms of power level and viability in current meta game modes, etc, etc. I'm just trying to help. Also, this should be needless to say, but if you want to Tier 3 someone just for the sake of Tier 3ing someone, then go for it. If you're a big Spider-Man fan, whatever, go Tier 3 him. That's why I took him to Tier 3. This list is kind of just for those who may be concerned about the effectiveness of characters in current game modes, etc, etc. If you really love a character, then go Tier 3 them, by all means. Ignore this tier list. So, without further ado, let's get started with the D tier. Now, the D tier characters are mostly relics of a bygone era, where the hardest piece of content in the game was World Boss Proxima. And I'm referring to Ant-Man, Spider-Man, and Black Panther. Now, these characters, they just do not cut it anymore. There maybe was a time where Ant-Man was very viable for PvP, and I think among these three characters, he was the closest one to actually being an important player in the meta when they got their Tier 3s. But that era is a time that has long gone by. Ant-Man will not survive in PvP nowadays, not against the likes of Sentry, Null, and Mephisto, and don't even get me started on their PvE viability. All of these characters are just weak. They do not cut it anymore. They don't have any of the unique abilities that allow strong PvE characters nowadays to remain strong for game modes such as World Boss Null, World Boss Mephisto, etc, etc. And these characters are in desperate need of an upgrade. And while I do believe that one day they will get an upgrade that may just propel them right back up to the top of the meta, that day hasn't come. And while that day hasn't come, I cannot recommend that anyone choose any of these characters from the Tier 3 Selector that they will be getting. Moving on to the C tier, we're looking at characters that are rather similar to the D tier counterparts that they have, in the sense that their kits are very outdated, with certain differences in their presence in the meta, keeping them in a tier above the D tier. For example, when looking at Captain America, what keeps him above the D tier is the fact that he is generally a very solid unit that is very difficult to play, and punishes those that aren't familiar with his playstyle. However, so much of Captain America's value comes in the fact that he has amazing versatility when it comes to the ways that you can use him. With the right uniforms, he can be a blast villain, a combat hero, and a combat female hero, thus filling three very important roles for ADX purposes. It's kind of amazing that he's the oldest Tier 3 in the game, and the fact that he's in C tier is a testament to his longevity as a character. But unlike in previous years, he doesn't provide as much value from a Tier 3 Selector as other characters might. The same can be said for Captain Marvel, who at one point in time dominated the PvP meta with her, at the time, unique ignore targeting ability. But the fact that so many characters have that now, such as Sentry, her very nature as a one-trick pony is being highlighted in the current PvP meta, and the fact that she has no other tools apart from that means that she really falls behind the current status quo when it comes to PvP viability. And her PvE viability has never really been the best either, and while she was the best for a universal female character for ABX purposes, other characters have thus taken that mantle as well, which firmly puts her in the C tier slot. The Winter Soldier's position in the C tier slot may be a little bit controversial, and I did consider putting him in the D tier slot originally, but I do believe that his power level is significantly stronger than those in the D tier, which made me put him in the C tier. That being said, he is the worst among these C tier characters, as while Captain America and Captain Marvel still have some sort of niche value in terms of gameplay. Winter Soldier's viability in certain game modes is reduced to his decent leadership. He got a tier 3 last year, but he didn't get a uniform that helped him adjust and acclimatize to the current meta of Marvel Future Fight, and he is really lagging behind. I suspect that in a year's time, if he doesn't get another uniform, he may be relegated to the D tier soon enough. Now we move on to the B tier, and this is where we get to the more solid characters on this list. These are characters that you can't go wrong with having at tier 3, and these are characters that serve some purpose for a roster in terms of the current meta of Marvel Future Fight. Now we started off by looking at Cyclops, who, while he's a decent character on his own, a lot of his value comes from his leadership and his passive, making him one of the best tier 3 supports in the game. This is extremely important for game modes such as Null and Mephisto World Boss Legend, where you're only allowed to bring tier 3 or transcended characters. Supports that fall within these categories are in very short supply, and it is because of that that Cyclops has very good value for his support capabilities. And for some, he might just make the difference that will allow them to clear Null or Mephisto for the first time ever. At this point last year, Black Widow may have been on the A tier, but given the World Boss Legend game modes that have come out since, her value has been reduced significantly due to the fact that she doesn't do quite so well in these game modes. However, that doesn't make her a bad character in the slightest. She is still a very good character for normal World Boss Ultimate, she's a very good character for Giant Boss Raid, Galactus Giant Boss Raid, and she's still somewhat decent for PvP. Now, some people may have think she's dropped off far more than that, but I think her value still holds. Her versatility as a character that can competently do PvE and PvP game modes with a single build is nothing to be scoffed at. Now, Black Bolt may just be the strongest PvE-based character in the B tier, considering that he boasts chain hit damage, debuff removal, a self-sustaining leadership, and accumulation. His PvE viability is quite decent. It just doesn't necessarily stack up to those in the A tier or in the S tier, but you really can't go wrong with picking him. He performs decently against Null and Mephisto, and serves as a decent leadership for Inhumans, currently and for whoever else they introduce in the future. When it comes to the Incredible Hulk, a lot of the basis of his power is predicated on his PvP presence, which is largely why he finds himself in the B tier. I find that personally, unless you are one of the best characters for PvP, such as Sentry or such as Jean Grey in the past, it's not really worth investing in because it's very easy for your power to wane over time as newer mechanics are introduced and new characters find stronger places in the meta. And I think this has happened to Hulk, not to a significant degree, but to enough that he's not necessarily in the A tier, which is where he would have been around the time that he came out, I believe. Hulk is still a very solid presence in PvP. His tankiness and his raw HP regeneration remains very formidable, and he's a pretty tough cookie to crack. However, and such has been the case with other characters, the PvP meta is kind of currently revolving around characters like Sentry and all that. And so Hulk doesn't quite stack up against those kinds of characters. That, coupled with his lack of PvE presence, makes it so that Hulk finds himself firmly in the B tier. Storm, much like Black Bolt, is a generally solid PvE-based character. There was a time where she was one of the best clearers for the Ebony Maw World Boss Ultimate. But given the release of World Boss Legend Null and Mephisto, which are game modes that she doesn't necessarily excel in, that kinda plummets her stock a little bit. Not to mention the fact that her movement speed in the game is absolutely atrocious. Still, she's a generally solid PvE character with a very helpful passive for elemental damage dealing characters. And taking note of all those things, the B tier spot seems like a fair place to place her in. As we move on to the A tier, we start to see characters who, while they're not necessarily at the top of the meta, they're very close. And maybe with a few upgrades in the future, they could find themselves at the very top eventually. But for now, this is where they are. The A tier is nothing to scoff at. These are some pretty amazing characters. And we start ourselves off with Iron Man, who has most recently gotten an upgrade. I've gushed about the upgrade that Iron Man got in a video that I did. Feel free to check that out. But yeah, Iron Man is just very solid right now. Yeah, maybe not the best in the male blast villain category, but still a very solid character. I was originally gonna put him in the C tier, but he's just come leaps and bounds from that. And his latest uniform has just propelled him way up in terms of quality. His PvE damage is fantastic, and the complete overhaul of his kit is just enough to bring him into the A tier. Thor is also kind of similar in that regard, where he also recently got a uniform that has provided him a massive upgrade. I think Thor with the endgame uniform, just like with Iron Man, is in the C tier, maybe in the B tier, I'm not sure. But definitely with this new Herald uniform, he finds himself in the A tier. He's a very strong character. His playstyle may be a little bit more suited for a Judgment or a Rage type CTP, but I find that it's alright to play him with a damage proc. And while, just like Iron Man, he's not necessarily the best for Universal Hero or Universal Male categories, he is a very strong character. You can't go wrong with choosing him, and will definitely be able to hold his own in tons of PvE content. Another amazing character on the A tier is Venom. Venom got a huge upgrade a few months ago and is one of the best combat heroes in the game. I think Moon Knight is still better at this point, but Venom is definitely up there as well. Again, similar to Iron Man and Thor, he's just very good for PvE game modes. He hits very hard and is capable of doing a job in some of the hardest content in the game, such as World Boss Fight at Null and Mephisto. Less so Mephisto, given that he's a combat type against a speed type. But you know what I mean. A good character overall, one of the stronger characters in the game. And so we find ourselves in the S tier. These are the heaviest hitters that you can get from the Tier 3 Selector. And these are the characters I would consider the best picks from the Tier 3 Selector if you don't already have them. And we start the S tier off with Sharon Rogers. What is there to say about her that hasn't already been said a million times? This lady's longevity is amazing to me because it seems like from the very first moment she was introduced in the game, she's always found herself somewhere around the top tier of the meta. And just when she was dropping off a few years ago, she got a shiny new uniform to shoot her right back to the top, and she kind of has remained there ever since. Maybe she's not at the very top of the DPS charts anymore with the introduction of Moonstone, but she is still up there in terms of having some of the highest damage numbers in the game. She has been one of the free-to-play champions of the game for the longest time, and until today, she still has her place at the very top of the meta and is without a doubt a great choice to use your Tier 3 Selector on. The only reason you maybe wouldn't is because most players would already have her at Tier 2, and maybe some of the other characters you don't already have, and so you want to use the Tier 3 Selector on them to get more value out of it. But that's kind of only a niche situation. If we're just looking at power level, Sharon is one of the best decisions you can make with that Tier 3 Selector. Similarly, Ghost Rider is one of the best characters in the game right now. That King of Hell uniform that we received a few months back, I believe is one of the best uniforms we've received in recent times. And Ghost Rider is just an amazing character from top to bottom. He hits so hard with all of his skills. Yeah, the cooldowns are a little wonky, so he may be a little better with a Judgment or a Rage, but I still find ways to make him work with a proc, and he is still amazing for me. Again, he hits so hard, and all of his damage is further amplified by his Tier 2 passive that increases damage dealt to supervillains by 120%. It really makes me so happy to say this because for the longest time in Marvel Future Fight, Ghost Rider was just a straight up terrible character, and this is kind of the first time ever, I believe, that Ghost Rider has cemented a position at the very top of the meta for himself. And I am so happy to be putting him in the S tier for a tier 3 selector. He is one of the characters I would highly encourage players to get if they can. The guy can basically do any PvE game mode for you without breaking a sweat. And I could go on and on about how good he is, but yeah, that's the bottom line. He's a great character. Definitely deserves his place in the S tier. So yeah, that's about it for the tier list. I'm gonna put it up here in all of its glory, just as a quick summary for those of you who maybe forgot where I put certain characters. Yeah, this was fun to do. I really enjoyed doing this, and I certainly hope this was very helpful for people who are kind of thinking about who they wanted to take to tier 3 and who may have been a little confused. Now, who am I using my tier 3 selector on? I'm not so sure yet. I'm kind of leaning toward maybe Storm or Black Widow at this point, because those are the characters I don't have built yet in terms of their gears. I have Black Bolt's gears at level 25 already. I have Cyclops' gears at level 25 already. So I'm thinking, I was considering them, but maybe not so much. Anyway, no one asked. I don't know what I'm saying. Yeah, I hope that this tier 3 selector tier list video was helpful. I hope that we're all able to enjoy the tier 3 selector when it comes. And as always, thank you so much for watching.